She caught me staring, not with anger, but with a calm that made my pulse stop. Then she said, "If you're going to stare, you might as well learn something." I thought she meant the lecture, but what she really taught me was how it feels to fall for someone you were never meant to touch. It started like any other afternoon, sunlight filtering through tall glass windows, the scent of old books and chalk hanging in the air. I'd been sitting near the back of the lecture hall, pretending to take notes, but the truth was my attention had drifted again. Not toward the board, but toward her. Professor Elena Ward. There was something magnetic about her presence, calm, composed, every movement deliberate. She spoke with the kind of confidence that made silence feel like respect rather than absence. Even when she turned her back to write on the board, the room seemed to follow her rhythm. I told myself it wasn't attraction. It was curiosity. Admiration, maybe. But then she turned, mid-sentence, and caught me. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Her gaze met mine, sharp but not unkind. The sort of look that holds a question inside it. I should have looked away, should have done the responsible thing, but instead, I held it. Something in her eyes didn't push me away, it invited honesty. The moment couldn't have lasted more than a second, but it left my chest tight, my throat dry. When she looked away, continuing her lecture as if nothing had happened, I realized that I hadn't heard a word she said for the last 10 minutes. After class, most students left in a rush. I lingered, gathering my things slower than necessary, unsure if I was hoping to talk or hide. The sound of heels echoed softly against the floor as she approached. "You stayed behind," she said, her tone casual but knowing. I nodded, trying to find my voice. "I wanted to ask about the assignment." She tilted her head, a faint, amused smile tugging at her lips. "Is that what you wanted to ask? Because from where I was standing, you looked like you were studying something else." The heat rose to my face instantly. I didn't mean to. Before I could finish, she lifted a hand, graceful, confident, and said quietly, "If you're going to stare, you might as well learn something." Her words hung between us, not sharp, but electric. She turned then, walking back to her desk, gathering her notes with unhurried precision. The line could have been playful, could have been a reprimand, but it didn't feel like either. It felt like an invitation to understand something I hadn't yet earned. The air felt different when she left. Heavier, charged. I stood there longer than I should have, her voice replaying in my mind, each word soaking deeper than I wanted to admit. The rest of the day was a blur. The city noise, the clatter of the train, even the hum of conversation around me, all of it faded behind that single moment. Her voice, calm and sure, kept echoing, "Learn something." I didn't know what she meant yet. But for the first time, I wanted to learn, not from a textbook, not from a lecture, but from her. From the way she looked at the world, the way she carried silence as if it were a language. That was the day I stopped being her student on paper and started becoming one in ways neither of us could explain. And though I didn't realize it then, that one look had already changed the rules for both of us. The next few weeks passed in quiet ripples. Nothing between us was ever spoken outright, but everything felt slightly altered. Her words, "If you're going to stare, you might as well learn something," had lodged somewhere inside me, shifting how I saw her, how I listened, how I breathed when she was near. She began staying after lectures more often, inviting a handful of us to discuss certain topics in depth. Eventually, those sessions narrowed down to just the two of us. It wasn't planned, it simply happened. One student stayed late to ask a question, another week, no one else did. And then it became our quiet ritual. We'd sit in her office, surrounded by shelves that smelled faintly of dust and aged paper. The window overlooked the campus courtyard, where the last traces of sunlight always turned the glass warm gold. Sometimes she'd hand me a cup of tea without asking if I wanted one. Other times, she'd challenge something I said, her tone sharp but never cruel. I remember one evening when she asked, almost teasingly, "Do you always think this much before you speak?" I smiled, looking down at my notes. Only when I don't want to sound like a fool. She leaned back slightly, eyes thoughtful. You sound careful. There's a difference. That was how it always was, her words wrapped in layers of meaning, pushing me to think beyond what I said. Every conversation felt like a mirror, showing me pieces of myself I hadn't realized were there. Sometimes, when she explained something complex, philosophy, psychology, the art of observation, she'd walk behind me to glance at my notes. Her hand would occasionally brush my shoulder, just lightly, as if anchoring my attention. It was innocent, professional even, but my pulse always noticed before my mind did. She had this quiet grace in motion, the kind that didn't need to demand a room's attention, it simply held it. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized that what fascinated me wasn't just her intelligence, but her stillness. She carried peace like other people carried armor. One afternoon, as we were dissecting a passage from Camus, I found myself staring again, not at her words, but at her hands as she turned the pages. Long fingers, ink smudged near her thumb, a small silver ring that caught the light when she gestured. She must have noticed because she paused, looking up with that familiar, knowing glint. Still learning? She asked softly. I nodded. Trying to. Her expression softened. Good. Curiosity is the only thing worth keeping. There was no teasing in her tone this time, just warmth. The kind that lingered after she spoke, like the fading trace of perfume in the air. When our sessions ended that day, I walked out feeling lighter but unsettled. Something unspoken was taking root, delicate yet undeniable. She wasn't just teaching me about books or theories, she was teaching me about attention, patience, restraint. And somewhere between the lines of her lessons, I realized I was learning something far more dangerous, how deeply someone could affect you without ever crossing a line. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was the quiet before it, the ache of understanding that you were already halfway gone without meaning to be. The rain started before sunset, steady, rhythmic, the kind of downpour that made the world feel smaller. The campus was nearly empty by the time I reached her office. My jacket was damp, my shoes left faint prints on the hallway floor, and the hum of rain against the windows sounded almost like static. She was already there, sleeves rolled to her elbows, reading through a stack of essays by candlelight. The power had flickered twice during the afternoon, and when it finally went out, she'd decided to stay. No reason to leave just because the lights did, she said with a faint smile when I entered. Her voice was low, almost drowned by the rain. I offered to help her sort the papers, and she didn't protest. For the next hour, we worked side by side, our conversation easy, about students, about the smell of rain, about nothing at all. The candlelight threw soft gold against her face, making her look almost unreal, like something half-remembered from a dream. At some point, she leaned over to glance at the paper I was marking. Our shoulders brushed, and neither of us moved away. The contact was so light it could have been accidental, but it wasn't. My pulse gave me away immediately. She noticed, I could tell by the faint pause in her breathing, the way her eyes flicked up and found mine. The silence stretched, fragile and full. Her face was close enough that I could see the small freckles near her temple, the delicate curl of hair brushing her cheek. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, she said, "You're not the only one who notices." Her voice wasn't playful or teasing, it was steady, vulnerable even. Something inside me stilled. I wanted to say something back, something honest, something that matched the weight of that moment. But all I could do was look at her, caught between what I felt and what I knew I shouldn't. The rain grew heavier outside, a soft roar against the glass. She looked down, finally breaking the gaze, and gathered the papers into a neat pile. "We should probably stop here," she murmured. Her tone was calm again, measured, but the warmth in her cheeks betrayed her. I nodded, unsure whether I was agreeing with her or trying to convince myself. When she stood, the candlelight flickered across her profile, catching the faint shimmer of moisture on her lips from the tea she'd been drinking. As I reached for my bag, she added, without meeting my eyes, you should go before the rain gets worse. I hesitated at the door. Part of me wanted to thank her, for the evening, for the lessons, for the connection I couldn't name. Instead, I just said softly, "Good night, Professor." Her answer came after a pause. "Good night." When I stepped outside, the rain felt colder than before, like it carried the echo of everything left unsaid in that room. I walked slowly, replaying every glance, every pause, every word. That night, I realized that boundaries aren't always drawn by rules, they're drawn by the strength it takes not to cross them. And as the rain kept falling, I wondered how long ours would hold. After that rainy evening, our dynamic shifted subtly. The tension lingered like a thread stretched too tight to snap, yet neither of us mentioned it. Our meetings continued, but there was a new layer beneath the surface, a quiet awareness that neither dared name. Conversations became more personal, but still tethered to the intellectual. Somehow, she had the skill of turning discussions about literature, philosophy, or human behavior into windows into the soul. One afternoon, I arrived early, finding her sitting in her office, her favorite mug of tea steaming beside her laptop. She looked up, and for a moment, her expression softened, almost vulnerable. "Late autumn has a strange light, doesn't it?" she said. I glanced toward the window. The sun cast long amber streaks across the campus. "It does, feels quieter somehow." She nodded, tapping her pen against her lips, her eyes thoughtful. "Quiet, yes, that's the word. Makes people notice things they usually ignore." I watched her. It wasn't just her words, it was the way her eyes lingered on small details, the tilt of a chair, the curve of a page, the steam rising from a cup. She noticed everything, yet nothing felt overwhelming. She noticed me, too, in ways that made me feel both exposed and cherished. We spoke less of assignments and more of fear of failure, of being misunderstood, of wanting too much and never having it returned. One conversation, in particular, stayed with me. "I used to think people could only be reliable in predictable ways," she confessed, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I spent years proving myself to the world, proving I could handle everything. But," her voice faltered slightly, "I didn't account for wanting someone to really see me, not just respect me for my work or my title." I swallowed, trying to find words that weren't clumsy. "I think, that's the part most people miss," I said carefully. "That what they see isn't everything, but how they make you feel, that's what matters." She looked at me, her eyes quiet, but something in them shifted. "Exactly. And it's rare, to find someone who listens with their heart, not just their ears." We sat in silence after that. The kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable, it's full, it's shared, it's intimate. My chest felt tight in a way that was neither painful nor frightening, but undeniably alive. The weight of everything unspoken hung between us like a delicate thread. I realized then that what I felt wasn't just admiration or attraction. It was something deeper, a recognition that she understood, without needing to say it, what it meant to want and to hesitate, to hold back and to feel fully at the same time. Her hand brushed against mine while reaching for a book. A fleeting touch, but it sent a current of awareness through me. She didn't pull away, nor did I move. It wasn't romantic, at least, not in the overt sense, but the intimacy was undeniable. When the session ended, we walked out together, still close, the sound of our footsteps echoing softly in the empty hallway. We didn't talk about what happened, or what almost happened, but I felt it. I felt her presence lingering, even as she said goodbye and I stepped back into the brisk autumn air. That day, I learned a lesson no lecture could teach: some connections are measured not in words or actions, but in what remains unsaid. And the weight of those unspoken truths can sometimes feel heavier, and more meaningful, than anything else in the world. The department had organized a small dinner at a nearby bistro. It was informal, meant to celebrate the end of midterms, but somehow, in that soft golden light and the hum of polite conversation, the evening took on a weight I hadn't expected. She arrived wearing an elegant black dress, not flashy, not demanding attention, but enough to make the room pause for a fraction of a second. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her face. The subtle scent of her perfume lingered in the air as she moved through the space. I caught myself staring, and this time, she didn't look away. We talked casually at first, about the students, about papers, about the trivialities that made life feel grounded. But beneath every word was a rhythm we both recognized, unspoken tension, careful restraint, and the subtle pull of connection. I felt it in the way her eyes lingered on mine for just a beat too long, in the way her hand brushed against mine when reaching for the breadbasket. Later, as the night deepened and the restaurant emptied, we ended up walking toward her car. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a pool of gold and red beneath our feet. The rain from earlier had left the world shimmering, and the quiet made every step feel charged. We walked side by side, and for a moment, the conversation ceased entirely. She paused, looking down at the glistening streets, and I realized I was acutely aware of every detail, the sound of her heels clicking softly, the curve of her jaw in the lamplight, the faint tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her coat. Then came the slip. Not an accident, but a gesture born of instinct. A loose strand of hair fell over her face, and I reached out, tucking it behind her ear. Her eyes widened fractionally, not in shock, but in recognition. Recognition of what we both had been pretending not to feel. The pause afterward was infinite. The hum of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves blown by the wind, even the quiet echo of our breathing seemed amplified. Her lips parted slightly, as if to say something, but no words came. Instead, she whispered, almost under her breath, "Don't make me forget who I'm supposed to be." Her voice trembled, soft yet firm, and I felt the delicate line between longing and restraint snap taut between us. She wasn't rejecting me, far from it, but she was reminding both of us of the rules we'd silently agreed to, the line we couldn't cross without consequence. I nodded, almost imperceptibly, understanding without needing explanation. The electric charge in the air didn't disappear, it shifted, settling into a quiet ache. We continued to her car, a respectful distance maintained, but our steps felt heavier, aware of the gravity between us. When I left that night, the world outside felt colder than it had before. I replayed the moment repeatedly, each time feeling the warmth of her hand brushing mine, the softness of her gaze, the quiet tension that had hung like mist around us. That evening, I realized the truth about desire: it isn't always expressed through grand gestures. Sometimes, it lives in fleeting touches, in whispers, in pauses that say more than words ever could. And sometimes, even the smallest slip can illuminate just how deeply two people can feel for each other without ever crossing the line. The weeks after the dinner passed in a haze of quiet anticipation. Every interaction with her carried a weight I could feel in my chest before I even realized it. The rain-soaked streets, the soft hum of the campus, the subtle scent of her perfume lingering in her office, all of it became a backdrop to a connection I could neither name nor fully control. Then one afternoon, she called me into her office unexpectedly. It wasn't a formal meeting, and I could tell from the way she was sitting behind her desk, relaxed, unhurried, that this wasn't about work. The room smelled faintly of tea and books, and sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting gold stripes across the hardwood floor. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Her tone was calm, but there was something in her eyes that caught me off guard: vulnerability. I sat, unsure of what to say. She studied me for a moment, her fingers drumming lightly on the edge of her desk. Then, almost as if confessing a secret she'd held for years, she said, "I need to tell you something." Her words made my pulse quicken, not from surprise, but from the sense that we were about to cross an uncharted boundary, not physically, but emotionally. "You've challenged me more than anyone else has in a long time," she continued. "Not with questions, or arguments, but simply by noticing. By being present. By seeing me, not the title, not the work, but me." I swallowed hard, feeling both relief and something heavier, anticipation, longing, and a fear of saying too much or too little. I'm not trying to challenge you," I admitted. I can't help noticing. And when I do, I don't want to miss anything. I want to understand. Her gaze softened. And you do. You understand more than I expected anyone could. You've made me remember what it feels like to be seen, truly seen, rather than respected or admired for what I do. We sat in silence after that, letting the weight of those words settle. The room was quiet, save for the soft tick of a clock and the faint rustle of pages from a book left open on her desk. I realized, in that moment, that everything between us, the lingering glances, the brief touches, the silences, had led to this clarity. Then she reached out. Not fully, but just enough for her fingers to brush mine as they rested on the edge of the desk. My chest tightened at the contact, aware of the electric pull yet restrained by the respect that had always defined us. She didn't pull away. Instead, she held the brush of skin against skin for a beat longer than necessary, letting the moment exist without forcing it into words. This isn't about desire, she whispered. It's about truth. About being honest with yourself and with each other. And in that room, bathed in golden light, I finally understood. The lesson I hadn't expected wasn't about her, or me, or even the tension that had woven itself between us. It was about courage, the courage to recognize connection, to honor it, to feel deeply without losing oneself, and to accept that love or intimacy could exist in many forms, even the quiet ones. When I left her office that day, I carried with me a weight that was both light and heavy, light with understanding, heavy with longing. I knew that what we shared had no easy label, no simple resolution, but it was real. And somehow, that made all the difference. The semester ended quietly, without the usual fanfare of exams and grading deadlines. The campus hummed with the low murmur of students leaving for the holidays, but for me, everything felt suspended. There was a stillness in the air, as if the world itself had recognized the subtle shift that had occurred over the past months. I knew she was leaving soon. Not the campus, but the university entirely, choosing a path that would allow her to step away from constant scrutiny and the routines that had defined her life for years. The thought should have filled me with dread, but instead, it brought clarity. Before she left, I arranged to visit her small, book-lined apartment. I wasn't sure what I expected, closure, confession, or perhaps just one last conversation. When I arrived, she greeted me with her familiar warmth, though there was a hint of melancholy in her smile. She had taken the effort to make the apartment feel like her own sanctuary, stacks of books carefully arranged, candles burning softly, and the faint scent of tea in the air. We settled by the window with steaming mugs, the city below bathed in the gold-orange light of late afternoon. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Words felt unnecessary. I watched her, noting the small details I had memorized over weeks, the way her hand rested against the mug, the curl of her hair catching the sunlight, the faint lines of thought around her eyes that made her look older, wiser, and achingly human. Finally, she spoke, voice low and deliberate. I've been thinking about what you've learned, and what I've learned. Funny how teaching isn't just about instruction, isn't it? I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I've learned more than I expected. About patience, about attention, about seeing someone beyond what they do or what they're supposed to be. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile that reached her eyes. Exactly. You were never just staring. You were learning how to feel. How to notice. How to understand someone in a way that goes deeper than words. Her words settled over me, warm and heavy. It wasn't a confession of romantic love, not in the traditional sense. It was something more profound, a recognition of connection, of mutual understanding, and of the kind of intimacy that doesn't always need labels. We sat together in silence for a while, letting the quiet hum of the city and the golden light frame the moment. When it was time to leave, I stood, hesitating, aware that leaving meant stepping out of the cocoon we'd built together. She reached out, placing her hand gently over my chest, just above my heart. The warmth lingered, and for the first time, words failed me. Goodbye, I said softly, though it sounded inadequate. Not goodbye, she corrected gently. Just, until later. Until the world lets us meet like this again. I left her apartment carrying that quiet lesson with me, that love and connection aren't always about possession or passion. Sometimes, they exist in recognition, in respect, in the way someone teaches you to notice life and people in a deeper way. Walking through the streets, I felt a strange peace. The ache of longing was still there, subtle and persistent, but it no longer hurt. It reminded me that the slow burn, the weeks of glances, touches, pauses, and confessions, had shaped something permanent in me, the capacity to truly see and feel. And sometimes, that lesson is the greatest gift one person can leave another. If you enjoyed this story and the quiet tension between them, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another slow burn romance. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in his shoes?